We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Nice to finally meet you, Laura. How have things been?
Busy and a bit tiring, but good. How about you?
Yeah, good, good. I'm sure many of our guests will know of you, especially your interview with Tucker Carlson was really, really popular, and it was amazing to listen to your thoughts on and your journey. But for people who are unaware of who you are and what's propelled you into this sort of limelight, who are you, and yeah, just a general overview of your career.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Laura Delano. I live in Connecticut in the US. And for the past 15 years, I've been working in what you might call the alternatives to the conventional mental health system space. So what I mean by that is basically helping people make more informed choices about psychiatric diagnoses, about psychiatric drugs, and about how to safely taper off of psychiatric drugs. And I founded a nonprofit, Inner Compass Initiative. I've worked one-on-one with people who are trying to taper, and all of this work was informed by my own 14-year relationship to the American mental health industry, beginning when I was a 13-year-old and ending in my later 20s.
Wow, okay. I mean, your conversation with Tucker was incredible. There was so much that I learned from listening to you, and just about the extent of how big pharmaceutical industries, the impact medical industry in the US when it comes to mental health, some stuff I'd never had any idea of. I mean, I suppose we can start with your own personal journey. I mean, how did that start? When did you start to use, when did you start using pills and stuff like that?
It began when I was 13, and I basically had what I now see an existential crisis where I lost touch with who I was, with how I fit into the world, with what it meant to be alive. Life took on this kind of meaningless, purposeless, um, it felt like this void, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. And I ended up beginning to act out at home because I was confused and I felt powerless and out of control. And my parents didn't know what to do with this, screaming and cutting and, like completely unhinged teenage daughter. And so they, did what all loving parents, are taught to do in our cultures. They took me to a professional. And this was in the mid 90s. And that professional, it was a therapist at first, who quickly realized, this young girl needs a more serious intervention here. So I'm going to recommend she see a psychiatrist. And my parents, trusting medical authority in the way that they did, said, "Oh, of course, of course." And so I sat down in front of a psychiatrist. And at the end of my first appointment, 1 hour, this strange woman I'd never met before proceeded to tell me that all of these intense emotions I was feeling, anger outbursts and the, ups and downs and the despair and the self-injuring, all of it were symptoms of this lifelong illness called bipolar disorder. And I was immediately put on a mood stabilizer and an antidepressant, and the rest, the rest is history. But at that time when I was first diagnosed, I knew this didn't make sense. I didn't accept it right away. I knew that I was having really meaningful responses to the pressures I felt in this. I was at an all-girls private school. I grew up in an affluent town. There were a lot of expectations on young people's shoulders in this town. I knew that I was having a healthy response to all of that. And so I tried to resist what that psychiatrist told me about myself. And I managed to, for the most part, for a few years. But yeah, things unfolded. Things then took a turn for the worse, you could say. And by the time I was 18 and managed to get into Harvard University, I was still kind of stuck in this game, this performance game that didn't make any sense to me, but I didn't know how to get out of it. I just hoped by the time I got there to Harvard that I would I would finally feel okay. And I didn't, of course. And I really spun out. And that's when I kind of voluntarily re-engaged with the mental health industry and then spent the next decade as a very good, compliant, deferential psychiatric patient.
How did what I found incredible is when you were taking the bipolar medication, you were still functioning in the sense of you must have been able to function and study at a high level to be able to go to Harvard. How did that work?
I think I just happened to be one of these kids who could, quote unquote, do school well. And so somehow, well, in high school, I luckily wasn't taking the drugs regularly because I knew instinctually that they were not something that I wanted. So I would take them here and there, but I often managed to not take them. And so in high school, I would say I really wasn't that under the influence of these drugs. But by the time I got to Harvard, I was. I was, I jumped on meds and I was so happy to take them. I was just so desperate for relief that I really embraced them. And honestly, I think it was just sheer will that I somehow managed to make it through college. I mean, I did end up eventually taking a year off because I was really suicidal and just totally a mess. And I was hospitalized and did a year basically of like treatment programs. But yeah, I think it was just sheer will. I think the only part of me that I managed to hold on to somehow through all of my psychiatrized years was my intellect. And I wasn't necessarily using it to think critically about much, but I was using it to perform well within the conventional game of elite education and patienthood. So I think it was just like a survival. It was the only part of me that I still felt like I had access to, and so sheer will just kept me going academically, I think.
When did it occur to you to almost totally reject what some of the treatments you'd been getting? At what stage did you think that this is 100%, I'm no longer doing this?
It took a long time. Yeah, I mean, I really was deeply invested in the pursuit of patienthood through most of my 20s. And with each passing year that I was a good patient and I went to therapy at least once, sometimes twice a week, I took my meds as prescribed, I tracked my symptoms and reported them to my doctor. Sometimes when I had to take the year off from college, I was hospitalized, did programs. Once I was out of college, I wasn't able to work or take care of myself. I was dependent on my family, and I would try to hold down jobs here or there, but I just was too much of a mess. And basically my job became treatment. And so with each passing year of that, as I kept getting more and more dysfunctional, my parents and I were being told that I was just getting sicker. And, two meds became three, became four, became five. And by the age of 25, I was such a mess. I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't hold down relationships. I was physically really ill. I weighed almost, 200 pounds. I was trapped in this body that didn't feel like mine. I had all these chronic health issues and pain and headaches and, digestive issues, and my cognitive function was horrible. And I just thought this was all me. I thought this was all me, this, seriously mentally ill person and because I couldn't take care of myself, because I was so sick, that's why I had all these health issues. And so in my mid-20s, eventually was told by all these fancy doctors I was seeing at all these elite hospitals, because I was born into a family who could take me to these places. They told us that my illness had become so-called treatment resistant, which, to me was a message of pure hopelessness, because I had spent my teens and 20s, especially my 20s, so deeply invested in treatment and so faithful in all these doctors to help me eventually feel okay. And now I was being told that I was just too defective for the treatment. And so I eventually made the choice to kill myself, because this was the only logical conclusion I could draw to my life. And so that happened at age 25. And when I woke up from the coma and was convinced that I've, failed, quote unquote, things continued on basically the same for another 2 years. And I again remained completely incapacitated, unable to take care of myself. And just each day was, taking a shower was a big deal, basically. And it wasn't until 2010 I was in a day treatment program at McLean Hospital, the esteemed kind of famous private institution in Massachusetts. That Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton and Ray Charles and James Taylor and all these bright lights of art and literature. So I was proud to be a part of this legacy. I was going there every day, all day, group after group, therapy session after therapy session, hanging out in the hospital cafeteria with the other patients. Like, this was my world. This was all I knew by then. And I ended up having a few encounters over the weeks that followed with a side of the mental health industry that I'd never seen before. And that is the power that mental health professionals have to strip you of your civil liberties. So I was made to go into the hospital when I didn't want to go in. Security guards were involved and all of that. I was made to take a drug I didn't want to take. And then not long after that, when I was really tranquilized by that drug, I slept through a therapy appointment after I'd been discharged from the hospital, and my therapist called the police to do a so-called wellness check on me. So these 3 encounters with psychiatric force dislodged that faith that I had previously had in this system. And I realized, actually, this isn't actually about care here. It's about control. I just hadn't seen this before. And now that I'm saying no, I'm seeing the system for what it is. And that's what sparked my capacity to ask questions about my relationship to these drugs and these diagnoses and all these professionals. And then what really woke me up was finding a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic, which came out in 2010, this was 2010, so it had just come out. And the thesis of this book is that if you actually look at the long-term evidence base for psychiatric drugs, on the whole, there's a strong scientific case to make that they are making us collectively sicker and more disabled. They're not actually helping us in the way we've been told they do. And so when I read that, which was hard to do because I was on 5 different psych drugs, so cognitive functioning was not super sharp. But when I read that thesis, it all clicked. And I looked back on the previous decade of my life in which I'd been such a compliant patient, getting more and more treatment as my life was falling more and more apart. And I realized, oh my gosh, what if it hasn't been treatment-resistant mental illness this whole time? What if it's been the treatment? And I could, once that lens of faith and trust and compliance was removed from my eyes, I couldn't unsee what I now saw. And it seemed so obvious and so clear. How did it not occur to me that all these drugs that I'd been on through all of these formative years of my life were actually making me sick? How did I not think of this? And so, yeah, that was really the beginning of what has since been this 15-year journey of really reclaiming myself from being psychiatrized.
I mean, when you first started using pills from a young age, see, it was what 13, 14 years old. Would you now, knowing what you know now, do you think you would have rejected them outright from the start, or do you think you needed them at the start?
I never needed them, and I feel very strongly that children should not be put on psychopharmaceuticals ever. Adults, I'm about informed choice. As long as you have the information and you see all the options at your disposal, whatever choice is right for you, I respect. But children can't consent. They can't choose. And these drugs interfere in such profound fundamental ways with basic human bodily functions, and to think about that interference happening while you're in the midst of development, I don't ever think there's a justification for it in kids. So my instincts knew that too. As that little girl, I knew that these pills were wrong. I knew it. I felt it so deep. But I was a kid. I didn't have a strong sense of myself. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I couldn't advocate for myself. I had no rights. I was a child. And
Yeah.
so in retrospect, if had my parents known everything that they now know, they totally would have made different choices on my behalf. But God bless them. They were doing the best they could with the information they had at their disposal, just as I think all parents are. And I think there's no need to place any blame on parents who put their kids on these meds. They're scared, they're desperate, they're confused. Oftentimes they're gaslit by mental health professionals into distrusting their own parental instincts and deferring authority over their children to paid professionals. So, yeah, it's not about blaming anyone really. Even the mental health professionals, you could argue, they too have been misled and kind of indoctrinated into false stories through their own education, which is so biased and corrupted by industry, industry influence and regulatory capture and all of that. But yeah, I never needed psych drugs. But I wouldn't change a minute of any of it. I'm grateful that it all went the way that it went. But there was nothing wrong with me at that age. I was waking up to self. I was waking up to the tyranny of, the individual and to ego and to, how hard it is to find a place to belong in this world. And all of the emotions that I felt were really wise and healthy, not symptoms. But there was no space to explore that. And I didn't find, I didn't have any Huxley books sitting around to dive into or Eric Fromm or, I didn't have any influences helping me kind of step back and think more philosophically and existentially about what I was in.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Did
I
you
didn't
think
stand a chance.
did you think a lot of this is some people not understanding the difference between maybe mental well-being and mental health? We've talked about it quite a lot on this podcast in the past, where it almost feels as if there's a much bigger diagnosis on people who have mental health when it really is just they've got some really bad mental well-being and there's stuff that they could do. And maybe in the West and UK and US, there's a real quick clamour to say they have mental health issues when really they need to work on their mental well-being a bit better rather than actually being diagnosed with something. Is that something you're seeing in the US and maybe part of some of the treatment stuff that happened with you?
Yeah, well, I think to me this comes down to the phenomenon of medicalization. And for anyone listening not familiar with that term, it's basically taking ordinary human experiences and translating them into medical problems that need medical solutions. And so for me, the very language that we use to talk about mental and emotional distress is at the root of the problem here. And by that I mean even saying the phrase mental illness or the phrase mental health implies that there's this, kind of end goal of it's a medicalized way of thinking about the very subjective experience of being a sensate being. And if you're thinking about I'm somewhere on the spectrum of being ill and being healthy, that then sets you up to translate your own experiences into symptoms. And I think a lot of what people call mental illness is actually their signals, their responses, their messages about the nature of your life, the nature of the world around you and your relationship to it, about sometimes there's signals about what you're putting in your body, whether it's diet or other, substances, about your relationships. But when you're reducing emotional distress into symptoms of an illness needing treatment, you cut off the meaning-making apparatus that you need as a human to think through what your struggles mean. You can't simultaneously have a chemical imbalance in your brain and be responding to, like the divorce of your parents and being bullied at school. It's either one or the other. You either have a pathology in your brain or you're having a healthy response to and by healthy, I mean like a logical, commonsensical response to a difficult situation. They can't both exist. And I think because so many people use this mental illness, mental health framework to think about their experiences, they they lose touch with the ability to step back and reflect on the role of socioeconomics, politics,
Yeah,
all these kinds of broader factors that, of course, shape how we think and feel and behave.
definitely. And I mean, I keep thinking that from your book and from your experience and from what you're doing, um, you must truly have had quite a lot of pushback from a lot of authorities and companies because what you're saying is surely going to anger a lot of people, a lot of businesses who have made so much money and so much power over people, and you're going 360 kind of against it. I mean, is that the case? Are you getting a lot of pushback now from e.g. your book and from some of the stuff you've been saying?
I'm I'm getting a lot of pushback, and funnily enough, the pushback isn't even like my book and the interviews that I do aren't even actually against anything, I would say. I'm just sharing my own story, and I'm sharing what I have learned along the way about the history of modern psychiatry and the psychopharmaceutical drug industry, and the problems with regulatory capture and the very the agencies that we entrust to protect us from unsafe products are actually captured by the industry that they're meant to regulate. I'm just basically sharing my own story and sharing facts. And then I leave it there for people to make their own conclusions. And yet somehow when people hear me or read my book, what they hear is that I'm attacking them or I'm, pushing an agenda. I will, like I said before, I do think that children should not be put on psychiatric drugs because of the profound consequences on their development that can potentially be irreversible. So I have a hard line there. But beyond that, I'm not pushing any kind of agenda beyond my conviction that people have a right to make true choices for themselves, and they aren't. And yet, yeah, I'm here. I'm interpreted as an anti-psychiatry, anti-science, anti-medicine, anti-drug person, which I'm not. I'm for choice. And I think it speaks to how distorted, like you said, of course, the industry itself is going to attack me in any way that it can because of the bottom line. But I've had some of my most vitriolic attacks actually from just people themselves, whether they're people who are on meds or they're parents of kids who are on meds. And I think those attacks, arise really from a place of fear and confusion. I think we have been so inculcated into seeing psychiatric treatment as one and the same with care and help. That if you question a psychiatric treatment, people think you're questioning the need that people have for help or the depth of people's suffering. And that conflation, I think, is what I'm trying to help disentangle, because of course people are suffering in profound ways. Of course people go mad and hear voices and have altered states of consciousness and think about killing themselves and try to kill themselves and are debilitated by pain, emotional pain. That's very real. And people oftentimes are in need of support. What I'm saying is we need to step back and ask if this monolithic power that we've given the mental health industry to both name and define what suffering is and provide all the help for it is actually working, which I make the case in my book. It isn't. More people are suffering than ever before, at the same time as more people than ever before are getting some kind of mental health treatment. So something's not adding up here. And that's what I'm trying to get people to start talking about, which I think they are.
I think it's healthy to have some skepticism towards this and not just accept something blindly. I think when I listen to you on your previous interviews, maybe it's a bit easier for me to relate. My father in particular is very just anti any taking any medication. He's just that kind of person. He believes in all natural. Your body heals itself. He's like yoga, all that sort of stuff. He's very, very anti putting anything into your body that isn't natural. So I think when I listened to you, I was like, wow, this is I can totally relate to the journey you're going through now, and I really do find it really, really interesting. But is it not just health? This is healthy skepticism for people to look into, not necessarily blindly follow. Is that not the case? Do you not get lots of people messaging you and being like, wow, this is incredible. Like, why have I not thought about this before?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I get more, I think I hear more often from people who are saying, wow, hearing your, you share your story in that interview or reading your book felt like I was reading my own story or my own son's story or my partner's story. And it helped me think about things in a different way than I'd been taught or than I'd been told. And I definitely think that for all the pushback and vitriol and resistance I'm getting more um, more messages of solidarity and recognition and identification. And I think, yeah, healthy skepticism is, especially in this day and age with everything that our world has been through in the last 5 years, questioning medical authority, especially when that authority has a lot of profit to make on you complying, is really important. And this doesn't mean that I'm anti pharmaceuticals. People think I'm that all the time. Some of my closest friends are on psychiatric drugs. Some of my closest friends are psychiatrists. This is not about this black and white, you know, evil and just, right or wrong thing here. It's so nuanced. And these drugs can feel really helpful for people. If you get panic attacks when you fly in an airplane, taking a benzodiazepine may well be super helpful for you. Or if, you are having intense, loud, penetrating thoughts of anxiety that you just you can't escape, tamping those down with a tranquilizing drug like an antipsychotic may feel really helpful for you, but it's not for the reasons we've been told. It's not because there's something wrong in our brains that these drugs are so-called treating. It's because we're having ordinary human experiences. And by ordinary, I don't mean, light and easy. Ordinary suffering can be profound. It's still ordinary. It's still part of being human. Where, these experiences that people are having are sometimes unbearable. And taking a drug that works by disrupting your basic brain function might feel really helpful. But people need to know that that's what's happening here. When you're taking this SSRI, it's so-called working by interfering with serotonergic function in your body, among other systems that it interferes with. That interference might feel helpful for you. It's not fixing anything wrong with you, though. And that's where the choice piece comes in. If you are being told your brain is sick and this is treatment, you're not making a truly informed choice. If you're being told you're having normal, your brain is working normally given your relationship to the world around you, and this drug is going to interfere with that in a way that might feel helpful, then great, make that choice. And especially if you're then told, and by the way, this drug has only been looked at for short-term use. There's no safety and efficacy evidence base for long-term use. And if you take it for more than a couple weeks, you might have a really hard time getting off of it. So build that into your decision-making. Like, people aren't being told that. And they need to be. And that's what I see my work as being about.
Interesting, you mentioned there the SSRI. For people who are unaware of what that is, I've heard you in previous interviews talk about that in quite a lot of detail. So it'd be really good to get a summary of that and why it's not, let's say, necessarily completely perfect.
Well, SSRIs are one type of so-called antidepressant. An antidepressant is just marketing language. These don't actually act against depression. But SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they're very poorly understood, as are all psych drugs. But the little that we do know, um, shows that they work, so to speak, by interfering with the, basically the production and transmission of serotonin, and they kind of artificially induce the amount of serotonin, um, at least temporarily, until your body then adjusts itself to compensate for that artificial surplus. And so historically, the story that was told to us was that, oh, these drugs work by artificially increasing serotonin. So that must mean that the original problem was that there was low serotonin. And so this chemical imbalance myth that was perpetuated, that's still perpetuated to this day, about depression being about low serotonin, just took hold across the Western world, and to this day is still a powerful mythology that people don't realize is mythology. And so these drugs, have such profound effects on so many parts of the human body. It's beyond emotions. Like our digestive system, the gut is large. Like most of the serotonin receptors in the body are actually in the gut. That's just one example. And so when you take one of these drugs, like Prozac, for example, and you're on it for months or years, it will have profound effects on various systems of your body, including, besides digestive, and one of the big ones that is now getting more attention is hormonally and around sexual function. A lot of people are finding that when they're on the drugs, they lose sexual function, and in some cases, when they try to stop the SSRI, they lose sexual function. And a drug that can interfere at that basic level of human biology is a powerful drug. And people are finally recognizing, like, wow, I was never told that I might never have an orgasm again, or have genital numbness, or feel zero arousal. Like, why didn't you tell me that, doctor? And for some people, it doesn't appear to be reversing. I stay hopeful that maybe for them, it's just going to take a long time. But a lot of people believe that for them, it's permanent, which is profound for our society. And when
Yeah.
you think about how many young people, especially, are on these drugs, literally as children.
Are they aware of these symptoms that this could happen? Are they told beforehand?
I mean, maybe some people are, oh, you may have, a little loss of sexual desire. But anecdotally, what I hear is that if that's even mentioned at all, it's in a very, it's kind of minimized, and it will sometimes be underplayed, like, oh, it's temporary, or, for me, when I think about how adverse effects were talked about by my doctors, I didn't even talk about sexual dysfunction because it didn't even occur to me that it was from the drug I was on. But I had zero sexual function through my 20s. I had my first orgasm in my late 20s after I came off everything. And I'm so blessed that I regained that function. So that wasn't even one of the adverse effects I recognized as such. But the big one for me was weight gain. And I would bring it up with my doctors because my weight fluctuated 70 pounds,
Wow.
which is massive. And I was made to feel like I was being shallow and superficial. Like, really, Laura, you're worried about your weight? We're trying to keep you from killing yourself. There was this, I think doctors have a way of minimizing and almost convincing their patients, whether they're intentionally doing this or not, to doubt their own concerns and to underplay them to themselves. And I remember thinking that. I remember thinking, wow, how unreasonable of me to be so worried about the fact that I've gained 70 pounds. Like, I have a serious brain disease. Like, that's what I need to be focusing on. It's crazy.
It's so crazy. I mean, one of the things that would be really interesting to hear you talk about is the sort of cultural and the societal take on medication. I ask this because whenever I watch anything on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, I'm always seeing people taking pills. It's just like it's almost as normal, like get out of bed and they're taking. Sometimes it's vitamins, whatever. But I see it a lot on TV, and it's very like normalized. I no longer. Well, I do see it as a bit strange, but I can see it's being normalized. Um, do you think that's having an impact on on the dynamic of medicalization, that more people feel comfortable taking um, lots of different pills for different things because it seems to be okay in the norm?
Totally. It's such a great point. Yeah, I think we've been deeply desensitized to how powerful pharmaceutical drugs are of all classes, not just psychiatric. We, through whether it's direct to consumer advertising that we have here in the States, which is crazy. I mean, I have friends, when friends visit from Europe and we don't have a TV, but when, friends tell us about watching American television, they're just shocked that, almost every commercial is ask your doctor with the soporific voice, and they're listing out all the crazy adverse effects that you don't even hear because you're so desensitized and so acclimated to these advertisements. I think you're hitting on one of the most core issues, which is that we have conflated care with pharmaceutical products, whether it's taking care of yourself. I'm taking such good care of myself. Here's my little tray of pills, my AM and PM, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the bright colors, and it's so cute, and I have it on my bedside table. Or whether it's, encouraging your loved one to seek mental health treatment because you care about them, you love them. We have conflated care with medical treatment at great cost to the cultural fabric and the fabric of families and neighborhoods. If you think about in the grand scheme of human history, the modern psychiatric industry is a blip on the timeline. Humans have suffered since the dawn of time, and we have navigated suffering and madness in non-pharmaceutical, non-medicalized ways until about a second ago in the human clock. And I think we've lost touch with that, with both what it means to suffer and how to bear suffering and how to become literate in understanding what your suffering means and what to do about it or not do about it. And I think we've also lost touch with the power and the capacity that we have to help each other as friends and neighbors and family members. So many people think if their loved one is suffering that they're not qualified to help them. I'm not a mental health professional. I don't know how to help you with this. You should schedule an appointment at the crisis clinic. I'm not saying no one should ever do that, but what I'm saying is we have to help us remember and reconnect with our deep human capacity to be with one another in great despair and suffering. And doesn't require going to graduate school and having letters after your name. And I think that ease with which people pop pills, thinking it's caring for themselves, is the same impulse that leads people to defer their own authority and their power to professionals who are providing services instead of true care, authentic care given and received freely.
What would that authentic care look like? So, if you're somebody who is taking lots of pills, or somebody's a husband or a wife, your partner's taking lots, but what would the attentive care look like as not a replacement, but almost replacement for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big question, and I think this is part of why the mental health industry is as powerful as it is, because for so many people, our lives are not set up in such a way as to enable us to actually take good care of each other, because people work long hours, they have bills to pay, they're holding down multiple jobs, to me, when I think about the times in my life that I've been there for friends who are in, whether it's an altered state that you would call psychosis, I've supported many friends through altered states, or whether it's someone who's in suicidal despair, or someone who's just like totally immobilized by grief, whatever it might be. I think it starts with being in touch enough with your own suffering, your own shadow side, that you can kind of that it enables you to access the courage to be truly with the other person in their own darkness without fear. Because I think a lot of times it's fear that drives people to fill their next prescription, to, make another appointment with their therapist, to send their loved one to the emergency room because they're in an emotional crisis. Fear of emotional pain, fear of madness, fear of the parts of being human that are dark and scary and confusing is I think the biggest obstacle. And when you've been through your own dark night of the soul and you've come through it, and you realize that my mind is not actually something I need to be afraid of, that then enables you to be with others in their own suffering without being afraid of it. And you can feel that. You can feel when you are in a dark place, you can feel the fear in the people around you. You can also fear when they're not afraid. And I think when you feel someone in your presence who is not afraid of your darkness, that enables you to be a little more open and curious to being helped and supported. And so, yeah, I think it starts with true presence, being truly present. And then I think it also starts with just getting practical and commonsensical, like helping the person actually think through what's happened to you, what's happened in your life, what's happened in your body. For example, maybe you've been eating, really shitty food for months and in front of a screen for 8 hours a day. And like, that's why you're having panic attacks. Like sometimes it's that simple, sometimes it's not. But just being a kind of almost like a sleuth with the person in a crisis to help them figure out what the story is of what's led them there. Because when you're given a psychiatric diagnosis, that shuts off any ability to make meaning beyond, oh, you're just sick. And so I think that's the next step, is helping the person actually think through, like, what's unfolded here that's led you to this place. And then that in turn will help you kind of figure out where to maybe suggest they go next. But yeah, who has time for this? That's the challenge. Everyone's so stressed, so busy, so screen addicted and depleted. And, that's the real obstacle now too, is that who has the time to actually be with someone in this way? It's really hard. And I get how romantic it might sound what I'm saying and how much harder it might feel to people to actually implement in their lives, but we've got to do it.
I think they'd be a lot happier overall implementing this in their lives. I think overall there'll definitely be much more happiness. What do you think the role of exercise can play when it comes to a lot of this? I mean, it's not always my go-to answer, but a lot of time whenever I speak to people who are not necessarily 100%, I'm always like, you should go for a walk. Let's go for a walk, or let's like on there. I just always think maybe it's just because of my job and it's always screen, it's always office, it's always sitting down. I'm very rarely, I don't get to do anything physical in my day-to-day job, which I think is the same for a lot of people now. So my always automatic response is just, let's go for a walk, let's do this outside, or let's like that kind of thing. What role do you think exercise plays in some of the treatments or some of the stuff we've talked about?
Oh, I think it's hugely important. And this is the kind of thing that, we would get accused of being, I don't even know what slur would get thrown at us for suggesting exercise. Like it's like a, white supremacist fascist thing to suggest a lifestyle choice. The way that these common sense evolutionary needs we have as human beings have been distorted and turned into, politicized, and it's just wild to me. But yeah, I think you're spot on. And I'll speak for myself because I've been in a 5-year chapter since I gave birth to my son, in which I have not cared for my body in the ways that I know it needs. Between having a baby, writing my book, running 2 businesses, having my son at home with me, breastfeeding on demand, bed sharing, it's been a rough 5 years. And so I need, to practice what I'm about. I'm not practicing what I'm about to say, but when I'm most in alignment with myself in mind, body, and spirit, I am getting morning sun. I am moving my body, breaking a sweat every day. I am eating food that will rot if I don't eat it within a few days. Food that came from the earth, that came, from an animal. I am in community, in real life community, not mediated by a screen. I am of service every day, getting out of myself, being there for someone else. I'm connected to a higher calling, to a purpose. And yeah, I'm moving my body in ways that I have been evolutionarily, I have evolutionarily evolved to move in, climbing and squatting and I have done. Oh, and I'm also in contemplative practice of some kind, sitting with myself. That's my list. It's like if I'm not doing all of those things, and then there's no point in even, going any further. Like until I've done those basic things, of course I'm going to feel off. and yeah, and I haven't been doing those things. So this is not me on some pedestal. And I've been in a rough 5 years. It's physically and emotionally, I would say it's been intensely painful, but I get why. I'm not afraid of it. And I'm also being really easy with myself and gentle with myself. Like, of course, it's hard to stay in a good routine when you're doing all these things, Laura. Like, you'll find your way through. And yeah, I think your instinct is spot on. Like, we are so out of touch with how we've evolved as human beings to live. And it is getting back to the basics. And it's not sexy and it's not fun to hear that moving your body and getting outside and getting off the screen and like, but that's those, if you're not doing those basic steps, then you can't expect to feel integrated in yourself. And most people are struggling or feeling like they're too stressed or overwhelmed to follow those basic steps, myself included. So it's easier said than done. But yeah, we need to return to the simple, obvious, commonsensical, evolutionary needs that we have as human beings if we are going to thrive. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
we have a long way to go.
it's definitely tough, and I think like in particular, I completely agree with what you said at the start, where about us even suggesting exercise can have an impact is seen as it's so politicized, which is absolutely crazy. But it's okay, I'm sure there's not that many people that can't get up in the morning and go for a walk. And I always just think, wow, like the difference between me on a when I've exercised in the morning versus when I haven't is I think there is you'd be able to tell there is 100% a difference. I can probably mask it for a little bit, but there is a stark difference between me, whether that's just a simple walk or whatever, an actual hardcore workout. I think the difference is substantial. And I always do think with not to diminish a lot of people's problems, but I do often think a lot of the simple things, like you've suggested there, would solve so many of these issues. And I don't know, going back to what I was saying a bit earlier, in terms of the Netflix world, I don't watch American like TV channels. I don't get to see the adverts, but I do watch a lot of American TV shows on these channels, Netflix and Amazon, wherever. And I just think it's crazy the amount of series, films I watch where the use of pills and just general drugs is used just like crazy. And I'm sure it's similar for UK ones as well, but it just seems really, really mind-boggling that that's such a alternative, and no one seems to. I definitely noticed it, but it just seems weird how many other people don't. Is there a cultural shift? I mean, you're obviously in this industry and know lots more people. Do you think it's almost too acceptable, like amongst people or friends that people are taking this many pills? For example, I speak to my parents regularly. Whenever I hear them say they've added another pill or something like that, I'm straight off the bat like, "Are you sure? What's going on?" Blah blah blah. Is it just too accepted now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a multi-layered question, I think. I mean, I think starting with having when I think about this phenomenon of, everyone medicated, whether it's psychiatrically or otherwise, I I like to kind of step into the shoes of who I was 15 years ago when I was, not only on many psych drugs a day, but popping Advil like it was my job and over the counter, cold medicine. I was a completely unquestioning, faithful consumer of pharmaceutical products. And I think, okay, what was happening for me then? What was this state of mind that I was in? What was the state of body that I was in? And I see I was living in such a disembodied way where, because I was put on psych drugs, and it started even earlier. I was put on I had chronic ear infections in early childhood, and I have a lot of theories about why that was the case. So I was on chronic antibiotics from birth to 5. I had my adenoids removed. I had tubes put in my ears. I eventually had my tonsils taken out, my appendix taken out. I mean, my body was screaming out inflammation and like disorder from birth, basically. And so it far preceded being on psych drugs, but I was living in a very disembodied way where I was disconnected from my body's signals. My parents were too, because of the culture that they grew up in. And so, of course, it would eventually become logical to just take pills like take a sip of water. And so I have a lot of compassion for this current crisis that we're in of, medicalization, pharmaceuticalization of everyday life, all of it. Because when you are disconnected from your body and its signals and how it works, how your body works, you don't even, I was on oral contraception for 16 years, having no natural menstrual cycle, put on them in adolescence. And so I think about how many millions of people are living similarly, disembodied. It's really hard to take your power back, to make different choices, to kind of push through the fog of pharmaceuticals that might not even be conscious you're mired in. And it takes really like for me, it took an act of God, I think, to transcend that sludge, that muck and mire of polypharmacy, to actually connect with my critical thinking capacities, to actually find the courage to make different choices for myself, despite how uncomfortable and scary it felt. So I think we need to have a lot of compassion and empathy and understanding for how pharmaceuticalized our world is. And I think the solution is re-embodiment. And that's not it's a simple solution, but it's far from easy. And that's, to me, like how especially for girls and women who grow up pharmaceuticalized and who, like me, never had a chance to come to understand how our bodies worked because they were interfered with by pharmaceuticals, we have to be patient and compassionate and really invite and inspire people to want to come back into their bodies. We can't shame, we can't judge. It's the forces that have led us here are so powerful and ubiquitous and invisible in many ways. We have to raise each other up and inspire each other to kind of like disentangle ourselves from it, which is not easy. Boy, oh boy, is it not easy.
How did you like taper off from you're heavily medicating for such a long period? I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to just taper off all these drugs. How did that happen for you? And what did you replace it with, if you replaced it at all with anything?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. I am a textbook example of how not to come off psychiatric drugs, because I didn't know at the time, at age 27, that all of these drugs I'd been on for years had led my body to become physically dependent on them. So I did not understand that when you want to stop a psychiatric drug that you've been on for a while, it's really important to taper very, very slowly. And by slow, I don't mean a few weeks or a few months. For many people who've been on, say, Zoloft or Cymbalta or Lamictal for years, they need years of tapering, literally, in order to avoid brutal withdrawal symptoms. Because yeah, for anyone not familiar with this idea of physical dependence, like the human body is organized around homeostasis. Its organizing principle is homeostasis. And when you interfere with how your central nervous system functions by putting a psychoactive drug in it repeatedly, as all psych drugs are, you cause your central nervous system to change itself, to change its structure, its function, to accommodate the presence of these drugs, like alcohol, caffeine, heroin, cocaine, any drug you take repeatedly, you may become physically dependent on. This is not addiction. It's not like you're craving your Zoloft, but your body is dependent on it. And so what we have found in the layperson withdrawal community, where thousands and thousands of us have spent decades helping each other come off of these drugs, is that tapering somewhere between 5 to 10% per month, or reducing that much per month of your dose, and doing it in a hyperbolic way, which basically means making each month's cut progressively smaller over time, is how most people find they can get off and stay off these drugs without debilitating withdrawal symptoms. And one thing to clarify is that because people are not being educated and informed about dependence and withdrawal from psychiatric drugs, because doctors are not trained in this, because there's this total void of understanding about this, when people stop their psychiatric medications and they feel horrible, they're then told, you're having a relapse of your illness. This is why you need meds. And then they go back on their med and they feel better. And they think, oh yeah, my medication really helps me because when I don't take it, I feel horrible. And when I take it, I feel better. They don't realize that this is actually withdrawal. You are in withdrawal. These symptoms are not of an underlying illness. They're of this disruption to your central nervous system's artificial state of homeostasis. And if you taper more slowly the next time, you might have a very different experience, because slower tapering enables your body to adjust to the changes in a less disruptive way. And right now, there are no official tapering protocols in the US. Over there in the UK, they're the Maudsley deprescribing guidelines, written by a couple of psychiatrists, one of whom himself is trying to get off of these drugs. And
Right.
those tapering protocols are based on layperson protocols. Like lay people, ex-patients, are the world's leading experts on tapering right now, which is, perhaps controversial to say, but it's the truth. It's very dangerous to ask a doctor to help you taper off. They don't know how to do it. They do it too fast. People are disrupted and then only realize after the fact, oh my gosh, this is what's happened here. I'm in withdrawal.
Because I don't know, I read somewhere before we did this chat, I was reading about tapering, and I saw somewhere, again, I'm not sure how true this is, but a lot of patients, a lot of people who do decide to taper, they end up almost taking on something else on that kind of fills that void. I didn't fully understand it. Maybe is that something that tends to happen when people taper off, that they end up taking something else that tends to fill that void, or is that not correct?
You mean like another pharmaceutical or something
Another
else?
pharmaceutical, or it could be like a exercise-driven thing where they just become obsessed with running, for example. I saw so many things where people change in terms of some positive, some not so positive. But is that quite common?
Maybe for some people, I think it's hard to generalize, but I do think for people who have tapered off too quickly and are destabilized by withdrawal, they do often seek relief from that destabilization. And so, my general philosophy is that keeping things as simple as possible, as uncomplicated as possible when you're trying to recover from psychiatric drug injury, or injury from rapid withdrawal from a psychiatric drug, is generally the safest bet. So not adding in new substances to the mix, not creating additional stress or destabilization, just letting the body kind of figure itself out, nourishing the body with whole real food, those kinds of things. But yeah, you're raising a really good point, which is that we end up on psychiatric drugs for a reason. And for me, certainly, and I think for a lot of other people, the original struggles we had that we turned to psychiatry to help us with were never actually meaningfully addressed by our encounters with psychiatry. And so when you come off psychiatric drugs, whether you do it safely or not, you're inevitably going to be faced with the real work, like the real beginning of the journey, which is, how do I learn how to be with myself and my mind and my emotional pain and not run away from it and not try to fix it and see it as a problem that I need to, treat. For me, what's helped me more than anything else has been changing my diet and changing how I make sense of my mental and emotional pain, and letting go of this medicalized self-understanding, and really coming to view my struggles as signals about my life, as messages about my life. And sometimes when I listen to those messages, they tell me I need to take different action. Like we're talking about before, get outside, Laura. You've been on a screen for 7 hours. You don't even know what the temperature is out today. But sometimes it's just, I need to feel it. I need to feel the pain and not do anything with it because I'm feeling grief about, how much of my day is in front of a screen because of, what my life looks like, and you know, not outside. There's a lot of grief to feel about that too. And I just need to feel that. So I think those are the two: shifting my diet, shifting the way I make sense of my emotions and thoughts. And I guess the third I would say is cultivating a deep sense of purpose and meaningful connection with the world around me. Like those have been, if I was going to say what replaced psychiatry, I don't
Yeah.
even think of it as a replacement, but that's how I've evolved. That's like the direction I've evolved towards, and in helping me, find my way through the ups and downs of life, I would say.
What I find amazing, listen to you of all the things that you're doing at the moment, is that you must feel quite unbalanced at times. I certainly feel like this, do multiple different projects on a daily basis, that I feel unbalanced in terms of the day. But with yourself, considering the treatment you've taken and the stuff that you've been through the last 15 years, um, I suppose how do you do it? Because you are doing multiple different projects. Your day to day is probably very different. It's not gonna be structured as proper if you're just doing one thing or in a 9 to 5 job. So how do you do it now? And um, has it been easy tapering away from the previous prescriptions?
Um, I definitely am not a shining example of balance in my life right now, I would say. And I'm hungry for for guidance from friends and colleagues around finding balance, because I'm figuring it out very much. My husband and I work together from home, and yeah, are juggling various, Inner Compass Initiative, the nonprofit I founded that Cooper, my husband, runs. We have a lot of exciting work we're engaged in. We have our first conference happening on December 4th, and for anyone outside of the US, we have virtual ticket options too. I have my withdrawal consulting business, my book, all of it. I have yet to find balance, and it's really hard. But I'm showing myself a lot of grace each day, and I would say, feeling a lot of grief about being a mother and a stepmother and a wife, and tending to the home, trying to do all of that while working full time is really hard and not possible, to be perfectly honest. And the I've had to grieve that you can't do it all well as a woman, despite what very powerful industries would otherwise have us believe. Um, but yeah, I'm a work in progress, and I'm gentle with myself about it. And I don't beat myself up about it. And I trust myself. Like, I know I'm going to find my way through this. But balance is really hard, especially in this technological age and this digitized age where we were all kind of hoodwinked into thinking it was going to make life easier. But it's actually, I think, made life a lot harder. Just the constant bombardment of stimulation, the speeding up of time, the lack of boundaries. I find comfort in knowing that we're all navigating this together, and I believe that we'll find rehumanizing solutions together to this crisis that we're in of overstimulation and disembodiment. Yeah, I trust in our process, and I trust in my process.
It's been amazing talking to you, Laura. We have a closing ritual on the show where I ask the guests for a unpopular opinion that they have, that they think should be popular.
Oh gosh, let's see. um, no one knows you better than you know yourself, including doctors and people with letters after their names. Doesn't matter how many years they've spent in graduate school and training. They do not know you nor your body better than you do.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that will be an interesting one. I think lots of the regular listeners will definitely agree. I think some people won't. It's definitely a thing in the UK at the moment. I'm sure the same in the US, where we're seeing a lot of it's a massive argument about teachers having too much of a role with children and the parents being no longer being parents, and there's been lack of accountability in general. That's a big theme. So I think there'll be a lot of people that agree with you.
I totally agree with that. And mental health professionals interfering with parents' instincts too. And as yeah, I'll throw that one in. As for any parent out there, do not let a mental health professional disconnect you from your parental instincts. No one knows your child better than you do.
Perfect. Well, that's a great way to end this episode. Thank you so much, Laura.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Sunil. It's been great to come on.